Yes. Welcome, welcome. Thank you everyone for being here in the virtual space. My name is William Thomas Hodgson. I am a theater practitioner and the artistic director of Oakland Theater Project, and I am happy to be leading this panel about More Perfect Union, the piece that you just saw. I want to say before we start that we're all in different spaces here. I am on the land of the Shasta-Takelma people, and I invite everyone to acknowledge the land that they're on as well. Let's just introduce ourselves to start. The beautiful singer in this piece was GAIL Simpson.
Hello, thank you. I am speaking from the ancestral lands of the Wapo, otherwise known as Healdsburg, California. And I'm the founder and artistic director of Opera Frontier. I was the producer, the writer of the lyrics, and the singer of the piece you just saw. And how much sort of introductory words would you like me to say here? Is that enough for now? Or
Yeah,
a little bit more?
We'll go around the room and then we'll come back. Yeah. Steve, tell us about you.
I'm Steve SHLISKY, and a longtime friend of GAIL. I was one of the two editors on this piece. And my background is in television broadcast. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm newly retired a couple of years ago, but I also teach at a local college in Oakland, Laney College. I'm co-chair of the media department. And I'm a past president and a current project committee chair for the local chapter of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences.
What do they do?
Well, you know them better as the people who give out the Emmy Awards. There's a National Emmy Awards, and then there's 19 local chapters, and I work with the local chapter, a little bit of work at National as well.
Amazing. I know I needed that to really appreciate you. And Garrett.
Good evening. Oh, wow. Good evening. Thank you so much. My name is GARRETT McQUEEN. I'm calling in this evening from the ancestral land of the Sioux, specifically the Wapakute of the Eastern Dakota. As far as Uncle Sam and my landlord is concerned, this is St. Paul, Minnesota, a very cold day here. I work as an independent content creator these days. I spend most of my time working as an executive producer of the TRILLOQUY podcast and owner of the TRILLOQUY LLC. I can speak a little bit more about that later. Beyond that, I do work with a number of different institutions as a curator, a public speaker, and in general, a good guy when it comes to spreading the word about racial equity in the arts and in classical music. I sit on the board for the American Composers Forum as their equity chair. I also do work on the leadership team with the International Society for Black Musicians and the Black Opera Alliance. So I'm really glad to be here and to have this conversation with y'all today.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. So I have to say, I've known GAIL for a couple of years now, but I got together with this group and the conversation that we have tonight is going to be brilliant. I'm very excited to be with these people. So everyone knows at home, I think that you're watching this on YouTube. We would love to hear your questions about this piece. We're going to dive into some kind of deep questions about process, about art making. We'd love to hear from you. You can drop those questions in the YouTube chat at any time and we'll be able to answer them live. So GAIL, do you want to start us off with a little background here? I have to say, I do not have an opera background, and it really helped me to hear what your source materials were, what your process was.
Okay, well, let me start a little bit back, which is, so I want to start right off with, originally this piece was called More Perfect Union. But recently we decided to add the title as Activist Aria to the title. And this is a way of signaling both that it is a call to action and also that it is associated with opera or classical music, because just as More Perfect Union, the title didn't signal much of what to expect. So I'm currently a student of bel canto, which is the Italian vocal technique, which is widely considered the basis for opera, European opera. And I'm a student of Heidi Moss Erickson's studio, a wonderful teacher. Music and performing were always a part of my life, but until about just a few years ago, it was always secondary to my life as an economist and an entrepreneur and parent. And recently, okay, so anyway, the other thing that I think is important to know is to say just a little bit of background about Opera Frontier, this company. It exists in order to make opera more accessible. This relates to some of the conversation we had last night, which I sort of forgot to say to you gentlemen. But it exists to make opera more accessible, partly to me because I love the music, but I didn't get I wasn't moved by a lot of what I saw within the things because the stories are so estranged and unrelated. So I created this company in order to be able to get away with things like introducing unexpected contemporary elements of dance and movement, of relatable context. I do it in English as often as possible, but every piece we use is, I think the technical term is we mess with a chestnut from the opera repertoire. And in language that I'm just beginning to understand and really appreciate from part of the conversation last night, I think I'm deconstructing, but I'm certainly appropriating the music, the DWEM music, dead white European males. Every piece that I do is built in that on a foundation of that. And I think
I've never heard that term.
Yeah, DWEM. Also recently, the last two pieces that I've done, I would have to say that I have started visiting and become conscious of the ways in which the pieces we are visiting the intersection of race and also cultural appropriation. So those are both things that, that is basic to all the work that my company does.
I love that. I think you said accessibility, and I feel like that's our big Pee-wee Playhouse word of the day. Like that's going to come up a lot tonight. I have so many questions about accessibility. Just to say, there's a lot of us on this panel that deal with DWEM, that are using the art forms of yesterday, and I am not a dead white man. So I think that's going to be a big thing that we discussed today. Garrett, you gave us some real big clues about what the source material is. Could you dig into, I can't even pronounce what the name of the original opera is. You're going to help me.
Yeah, so it's the opera is Die Fledermaus, or the bat is how a lot of people would translate that. Most folks who know my work know that I spent the first decade of my career as a professional bassoonist. So Die Fledermaus is an opera that I've had the pleasure of performing many times, I think 3 times. And the long story of it is about a chambermaid who gets her mistress's clothing and sneaks off to a party, and all of the hijinks that can happen there, with the central sort of ingredient, I'll say, being champagne. It's a very light opera with a lot of funny moments even in it. There's even a tune in the opera known as the Laughing Song that I'm sure you're familiar with, Gail. But in the aria in which this piece of music was derived or appropriated, I love that you use that word. I think that's very interesting. We have someone from afar, someone who's Hungarian, bringing into the land of Viennese waltzes and polkas the czardas, a dance and a music style from Hungary. And in this scene, we have just this this song and this emotion about homeland, and oh, how beautiful it is. And I think in context, it's really interesting because this character, this mysterious Hungarian character, is coming among all of these Austrians, these, high cultured Austrians, who all of a sudden have to deal with their space being disrupted. And I feel like that's a lot of the conversation surrounding the arts and the general discourse these days, disruption of spaces and what we can do to change those spaces and make them ones that are more accessible to more people.
I find that story so relatable, kind of a pauper to prince story. But it also seems like when we're using a term like appropriation, and I think we're saying like a justified appropriation, we are recognizing something that was not accessible, something that wasn't relatable in that. Steve, Gail, do you have anything to say about like what the impetus to make this project was? Why you didn't feel it was as complete as it could be? And I don't want to put words in your mouth. Correct me.
No.
Correct me, please.
Okay. Well, I think it's important. It's important, I think, to know how this piece came about. It was COVID related because I had extra time on my hands because of COVID isolation up here. I decided to work on this piece, Klänge der Heimat, which is this beast of a piece to sing. And I listened many times to it in order to learn it. I listened to the Barbara Hendricks splendid recording. She does a beautiful job. And then, of course, as I studied the German lyrics, as one does to digest the meaning, I started to, so let me share the lyrics. So Garrett mentioned them. Music from my homeland brings tears to my eyes. Oh, my homeland, where I was so happy. I miss you so much. My soul is dedicated to you alone. So I'm working on the lyrics and I'm learning and I'm listening to Barbara Hendricks sing this song. And at the same time, I am watching on the national news. It's filled with images of black men dying at the hands of police, the BLM treatment, protests and the treatment, and a president that's stoking, this racial tension. And I think this is the first time I'm saying it with probably accurately. I've been saying it made me wonder, but actually it just hit me in the gut. The idea that how could a black person perform this aria with this feeling about homeland when it was so obvious, So at any rate, to cope with sort of this gut punch, I just embarked on rewriting these lyrics to say something that would say something with this context in mind. And that's the genesis of this piece. I mean, why I picked this piece and why I took it in the direction that I did. It took me a long time to do the lyrics, and because I wanted to match the cadence, and in fact, almost use the word homeland, because that is literally the cadence of the original. Thinking of my homeland is almost a translation. So I started putting together my thoughts on this, and these quotes kept coming to me. The one from Hamilton, not throwing away my shot, and the John Lewis one, make good trouble, and I quoted America the Beautiful because that was the anthem that was being spoken of, and then Michelle Obama's, when they go low, we go high. So I sort of started with these pieces these things that were really speaking to me in this moment. And but I was just stuck about how to finish it, because it ends in this. I mean, I sing it at about a quarter of the tempo that most people want to sing it at. It's a kind of a throwaway, isn't it? Kind of a throw. It's a drinking song. It's a dancing song. It's happy. It's cheerful, and it just gets. So I was kind of stuck. How am I going to do this beginning that I want, where I use these profound things, and then how do I tie it together with this happy, upbeat stuff? And I was so lucky, because I found the hook in Obama's speech at John Lewis's memorial, where he spoke about, he reminded us that from the very beginning in the USA, we have been a work in progress. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union. And he reminded us that we will never be perfect, and it will always be something we have to work on. And that was where I found the ending. I found the ending in that. So I guess I wanted to sort of put that out there, because I know that the questions about me appropriating the language from John Lewis and the language from, Hamilton. So what do you think of that?
I mean, Garrett, do you have an idea about that?
What came up for you?
I think the word appropriation has sort of been given a negative tint, and appropriately so in many cases. But I think when we talk about appropriation, sometimes we can talk about appropriating things for good, especially when we talk about appropriating for access. So when it comes to, again, the lyrics of this aria, the music and the idea was appropriated as a means of, accessing what the spirit of this piece of music is and the message that it could be given today. So if I use the word appropriation in this conversation, or in the context of the use of this, I'm not talking about something negative, because appropriation doesn't always have to be that.
So,
yeah. Oh, go ahead, Gail. Sorry.
I was just going to ask, did using those particular phrases raise anything for you as you were hearing it for the first time?
As I was hearing phrases like, make good trouble, to be specific, to center in on that one. I think sometimes we have to sort of understand what that means, what that has meant for so many people. Let's think about the legacy of John Lewis, the good trouble he got in. Tomorrow is Martin Luther King Day, the day we acknowledge there. And many people are returning to his letter from the Birmingham jail. When we talk about good trouble, people paid the ultimate price. There are people who died even today, folks who are arrested and killed unlawfully, folks who are just under the scourge of America's original sin. So, understanding things like good trouble, we have to, do more than just say those things, but understand the implication behind them. What sort of good trouble are we willing to get into with our art as folks who advocate for the arts? Does this feel like, good trouble to you, this video? It may, and it may get you in some good trouble. I think we have to really understand, again, the context and the reality behind some of these phrases if we're going to, choose to appropriate them for different things.
Something that struck me as a Black man, I do have sometimes a confusing relationship to my homeland. So just the word homeland triggers something, not necessarily a terrible trigger, but what you've done here is you've appropriated it, but you're not using a Black singer. It's still, and I think there's something really interesting in that we don't talk about a lot. Who is your audience for this piece, and why did you decide to sing it yourself? I think there's a really interesting story behind that.
So I rely for this piece, and recently, I mean, the last 5 years, I've been relying very much on I think of them as my mentors of color, my Black friends, my Asian friends, who will comment to me and tell me, really. So my congregation, Unitarian Universalist Church of Berkeley, has for 5 years or longer been had a group called People of Color Caucus and the Whites Against White Supremacy, Whites Opposed to White Supremacy, the WOWs. So the POCC and the WOWs have been doing a pretty good job of battering, of making us as a congregation, primarily largely white congregation, pay attention to the extent to which white supremacy, we are all part of the white supremacy system, that none of us can avoid it. So where did I go? I was answering a question, and as usual, I lost track. Where was I going? What was I saying?
I think you were speaking to your audience. Who's
yes,
your audience?
thank you. So yes. So the question was, because I had feedback from my friends in the beginning, who I was and who I was speaking to. The lyrics were mushy, and I really, thank the feedback that I got from, I guess, Laney, who just said, "Honey, you got to take a stand here. Who are you talking to?" And it mattered on lyrics like, "You've seen them take a knee," or "We've seen them take a knee." So in that sentence, I started out with, "They've seen them take." I tried all the different who is it that's saying it and who's it being said to, and with Lonnie's help, I realized I couldn't be anything but a white person saying this, and that who I want to speak to in this piece is other whites. I said other white people who may not be aware of this. Of course, we all know that there have been atrocities and that there have been problems, but I think this is intended to raise the level of consciousness of people for whom it's easy to just say, in the white land that we live in, this isn't as visible. And I was sort of trying to say, no, guys, I start out by saying, "America, how wonderful you sound." I didn't say, "America, how wonderful you are." I said, "America, how wonderful you sound." And I was setting up this world that it's easy to be comfortable in if you're white. And it's sort of the Norman Rockwell paintings of art, terrific. And so I set that up, and that's who I'm speaking to, is the people who identify with that, and for whom that is where they want to live because it's lovely. But then I said, well, but I use that then to say, but that isn't all there is to this America, and we need to pay attention. So that is how I ended up choosing the voice I was using and to whom I was speaking. And a couple of my Black friends said, some of the images are uncomfortable, and if you're speaking to a Black person, I don't want to see this or this or this. And I took those comments seriously, because obviously I'm assuming there may be a larger audience, there may be people of color who see this and don't want to, and so I took seriously, but ultimately I had to decide, well, I have to use the images that I want to speak to the audience, to my audience. And so there was a back and forth, very much a dialectic on back and forth on choosing those.
We're speaking to a little bit of the anxiety of a well-intentioned thing, but of appropriation can be like I just don't know my place. And sometimes I feel like we put a lot of authority on Black people, on underrepresented people, even though there is a lot of power in whiteness. Steve, and I've also got some comments in here that are kind of saying something similar, like I have done a similar art project and I don't want to usurp the voices that I'm trying to help. I wear a Black Lives Matter shirt or mask or something, and I get side eye sometimes. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. Steve, there is a lot of images in this, and can you speak to any trepidation you had around picking these images? What was that process like?
Yeah, so I've been Gail's sort of go-to editor for a long time now. And when she came to me with this project, she said, well, I really think I need a person of color to edit this. And I said, well, I have a good person, one of my students who's now freelancing, and she was the first editor on this project. And so I suggested her. And but basically, they ran out of time. She had to go on to another project. And so Gail called me up again and said, can you do it? And it's a real struggle for me, because I really believed in Gail's search for a person of color who understands all of this better than I do. It's not my experience, and I don't want to pretend that I know much about race other than looking at it from a white person. And so for me, it was sort of a struggle, because as an editor or as a producer, I'm always trying to help and trying to figure out and problem solve. And so I wanted to solve this problem for Gail, but I didn't have a backup. And so we decided that I would take over the project. And I have to say, I was pretty much uncomfortable with doing it, but listening to Gail and listening to what she wants and trying to problem solve and so forth, and asking questions about the images and about where we use the images, just trying to get her to talk about what it is she wants, and then to give her to problem solve and try and figure out visually how to give her what she's intending this video to be. But I thought about that at every point, every conversation I had with Gail, that I'm not really fully comfortable with this. I know I'm sort of wrong for this, but there's this other hat about solving this problem, being an editor and trying to realize to the best possible ability what it is that Gail wants.
That's beautiful. So I'm hearing there are so many barriers to access around the original piece, and they're abstract. I think the original opera is probably beautiful. Like I said, my background is not there. I don't want to offend any opera heads out there. But when we're talking about barriers, one that we can be really specific about is the language. The changing of the text really makes this sing in a new way. What other barriers were you facing with this that have changed? I'm thinking like venue, I'm thinking our general conception of what the opera world is. Does anyone have anything to say about that?
I'd like Garrett to talk about that.
Well, yeah, when we talk about barriers of entry, COVID has put everyone on the same playing field. The Met is dark, so that means the largest of all of the institutions. So what that means is we're all on an equal playing field, and we really have the privilege, we have the benefit of reaching audiences that would have felt threatened by the space of an opera house, or asking questions of what to wear, or why is there no one in this space who looks like me or can speak to my experiences. So when I think about putting this on the digital front, I really think about the advantage in being able to reach new folks. But as we were talking about the different images, I think it's important to note that, a critique, something at least to think about is, who is benefiting from the pain and the anguish and the discomfort that are displayed in those images. I think that's why diverse perspective is so important when it comes to a work of art that represented so many different struggles and so many different perspectives, is really understanding that those are more than just images. Those are lived experiences of folks who went through and continue to face so much trauma. So, in spreading awareness about the things that, we want to spread awareness about through our art, I think we have to foreground that idea and consider it when we're putting things together. Who is benefiting from whose pain?
Mm.
So it certainly came up, and I was very honored to be able to include in this video. I got permission from a photographer named Stanley Foreman, and he permitted us to include a Pulitzer Prize winning image that he took, and it was the one of the person using the flag as a spear, and the image is called "The Soiling of Old Glory," and he took it in I believe it was in Boston somewhere in the 70s during when there was a lot of protest against busing integration and integration. And in learning more about Stanley and his work, I was very moved by to find out that I saw another image he took. It's an image of his other Pulitzer Prize winning image was of a mother, a young mother and a toddler. He captured them midair as they were falling to their death, having fallen off of a crumbling fire escape. There was smoke and all around, and they died. Or at least the mother died. I think the child's fall was broken by the mother's body. And that image has been used a lot, apparently, in photography school and in journalism curriculum, with raising the question: when is it exploitation of those people's pain? And the reason that image gets a lot of attention is because they were asking to balance the potential benefits of using that image or images. And the standard is, does it bring good? And can good come out of showing it? And in fact, that particular image of the two falling figures ended up within a very short period of time resulting in regulations about preventing that kind of accident from happening any further. So that became a kind of standard. Not that anywhere do I imagine that there's that level of importance here, but I tried to weigh each image against something like that. Is using it potentially more beneficial than the harm that it could cause? And in fact, I dropped, in the beginning, when I was starting this, I had not been part of this conversation, and it was, I contemplated using in the harsh reality, the one about you need to hear their story, they've lived in harsh reality. I contemplated using the image of the lynching, the very famous image of the lynching with the people in front turning and smiling at the camera. And I just very clearly got the signal, no, there was too much trauma and harm associated with the benefit of me putting it in there was way, didn't come close to the harm that it would cause. So, and I backed off on using I used blood as the suggestion of the violence that was done against Harvey Milk. So it came to my attention, and like Steve said, maybe he said it yesterday, maybe we made good decisions, maybe we made good decisions 20% of the time, maybe we made really bad decisions, and I think that's what's there to do but wait to find out.
Oh, go ahead, Garrett.
I think the binary of good and bad can't be so clear when we're talking about the use of imagery, because what came to my mind as you were talking, Gail, was the story of Emmett Till and his mother's decision to have an open coffin, and that image was on the cover of Jet magazine, I believe, and it raised so much awareness around that. Being here in the Twin Cities, the fire, literal and figurative, surrounding the murder of George Floyd, has inspired so many conversations. I remember before it was all national news, it was very much local circulation of that video of him being killed. And I remember, initially having the response that we need to stop spreading murder porn. I don't know how I feel about that perspective so much now, because we know what that image did to the world, the reaction that it's inspired. I think the bigger question is, was the reaction to a good? Okay, more people are aware. What is going to be done with that awareness? I think if the use of some of these traumatic images, if the result is going to be nothing but awareness, no action, no actual change, we should reconsider their use. I think it just puts a responsibility behind the folks sharing those images to actually be a part of the actionable change, and not only the spreading of awareness.
I think there's another idea that sort of came to mind from our previous conversation: the role of art, risk, and critique. I do struggle with this project, but I also realize that I can't learn more about it unless I throw myself into it, do something, and get critique for it, and maybe know what not to do next time, or maybe figure out a better way to express myself. But I thought a lot about our conversation yesterday. A lot of it has to do with risk and being an artist and accepting a risk. And I think ultimately the struggles I feel, I come down on that side. Well, you know what? I need to risk it to have a gain.
Yeah, yesterday it came up, the difference between allyship and being an accomplice. And it feels like I understand the intention of this project. And it's like we keep pushing the needle back and forth about what is appropriate. And I think it's so important to know who your audience is and what is effective for them. Something else I've kind of been thinking about is we talked about who this is for. Even for our white audiences, there's some things that we've done to this piece around language, around putting it in your living rooms. Garrett, you said something really great about opera, and the only thing I really knew about opera is that a good opera is in Italian and German and not English. That's the only kind of tropic thing I had heard. Could you dive into that more?
Yeah, I think when we talk about more generally increasing diversity in audiences, and even who we see on stage, we have to accept the change in the general aesthetic. I think there's an aesthetic of foreign language art song that people are really used to when they think about the word opera. But as I mentioned yesterday, there are examples all over the repertoire of composers who believe that certain pieces of music should be performed in the language of the people, as you'll often see. The Magic Flute by Mozart is a great example of that. And actually, I believe Die Fledermaus is another example of the times I've performed it. Not all of them have been in English, but a couple of them were. So I think that sound aesthetic is a small, very granular example of what we need to be open to when we talk about really busting open opera, busting open the arts, and applying them to activism. How do we go even further? Maybe adding beats and 808s, maybe really centering new opera and the opera of new composers and living composers, maybe even inserting songs like these, renditions of songs like these in performances that are happening. We talk about yesterday, we were talking about the difference between an ally and an accomplice. Maybe an ally would have written this piece of music and created the imagery that we saw earlier. Maybe an accomplice, when the world opens back up and a company is performing Deflator Mouse, maybe an Accomplice will perform this version instead of what was originally written, and face the equal reward and benefit from raising awareness, but also the same risk as Steve was speaking to. So I think all of those things have to be considered when we talk about the general aesthetics that have to change in diversifying opera, and changing language is a very, 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 very small part of that change in aesthetic, but a really important one, and one that can definitely have a huge impact when we talk about exposing new audiences to this sort of thing.
I've heard someone describe allyship being an accomplice as it costing you something, that it is performative allyship if you declare your values and then you don't have to do anything beyond that. And I think what you're saying is this is something that you build upon. There is a next step. This call to action is not finished in some way.
Because what has it cost people of color? Again, let's think about some of the images we saw in that in that project. You know, people died, people went hungry, people were homeless. You know, even today, you know, there's so much happening that that costs people of color, you know, just to exist. There is a cost for that when you live in a white supremacist country under a white supremacist leader within an arts infrastructure that has historically centered Western Europe, you know, so there is a cost there for people of color. When we talk about being an accomplice, when I talk about that anyway, I talk about taking on some of that cost. Maybe something you say in allyship to me will cost you someone's trust or cost you an opportunity. That's really the crux of what we're talking about when I say the differences between being an ally and being an accomplice is taking on the cost that people of color pay for just existing.
I love this. And I just want to acknowledge it probably, I mean, Gail, and see if you can tell me, it probably cost you a little bit of something. This conversation is probably uncomfortable on some level, just because, you know, I'm used to talking about race. That's a part of my conversation every day. But I love what Garrett is building, that is the first step. And in building a culture of accountability, you're going to welcome that more and more and become more and more comfortable with that, which I think is beautiful. And it sounds like Opera Frontier is the perfect place for that disruptor energy. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here, but one of the things I can't help but think is my experience going to a theater. I do a lot of, what do we call it, DWEM? I do a lot of DWEM work. I see a lot of DWEM work, and I'm often in billion-dollar buildings with mostly white presenting faces. And even that in itself is an alienating experience, to have everyone kind of check in with me before they laugh about something a Black person said on stage. Just the ownership of the space, the ownership of the art. I think there's a really abstract thing that this piece is doing there too, kind of democratizing who owns this. I don't know if that spurs anything for anyone.
I think that's exactly what the scene in the opera and what the piece of music is portraying. Again, we have this mysterious Hungarian amongst all of these other folks really owning the space, you know, not just a part of it, but the center focus of it, singing this song, not only about, you know, her experiences in that space, but how much she loves a homeland that is so beautiful that you people have no idea what it's about, but oh my goodness, let me sing a song about it for you. So I think when you talk about being, you know, that feeling of isolation in those art spaces today, yeah, I definitely think there's a direct correlation there. I think one of the things that we brought up yesterday in that conversation was the discomfort in being racialized when you're not necessarily used to being racialized. In that moment in that opera, all of the people at that party had to think of themselves as something different because they were seeing something different. That mysterious Hungarian may be someone who always has to think of themselves as something different depending on, you know, whatever they're doing outside of that scene in that opera. I think obviously that directly relates to folks of color, Black folks and others in the arts and otherwise today, you know, really being used to thinking of yourself as someone different, someone who has a different experience or looks different. That's not always the experience for white folks in the arts. It's probably very rare unless, you know, you're in the tradition of reggae or something. So I think, you know, that all of those things, you know, that's what makes the appropriation of this music, of that composition, such a great jumping off point for artistic expression and conversation. There's so many connections there.
So you're touching on something that for me is bringing up, I mean, you're talking about performing in or being in the audience in billion-dollar buildings, and you've had a career as a classical, a classical musician. And I am, my experience as an artist and performer is very much sort of part of the people's experience, not as a professional, right? You've all been professionals in this industry. So, so I'm acutely aware of the fact that I have this I run these little projects that are interesting to me with this little opera company, and without credentials, without a built-in audience. And, I put them on the internet, and I'm thrilled if people, if people watch them and respond. I'd love to hear people's, what does it bring up for you? And so far, the attention that I've had comes from two of the performance pieces that we've done. One was a pop-up at the Palace Hotel, which got a lot of circulation. I have like 400,000 views, almost. A lot of circulation because what we did was we took this. One of the taglines for the company is Opera Frontier. Empowering our heroines one scene at a time. And in that, at the Palace Hotel, we surprised guests at a brunch, the fancy Valentine brunch, with the quartet from Rigoletto, and I got to sing Gilda, and I was supposed to be 16 years old, and I'm watching my lover flirt with a prostitute, and in the scene, the way we worked it out, it was obvious that I was upset. We were singing in English, but it was quite clear to everybody in the audience that a woman had stumbled upon her husband and flirting, inappropriately in public with somebody else. And Gilda got her revenge because in our scene, it ends up with a slap. So she, at the very last, at the last beat, she just walks up to him, taps him on the shoulder, he turns around and she whacks him. And so that is sort of, so I am doing my best to figure out how to, within this art form, create something that is obvious to people who see it and empowers these characters, because so often the soprano, this role, is a victim. So so at any rate, I'm just talking on about the challenges of being an artist in a country where you have to be an entrepreneur yourself, or you have to be very lucky and very accomplished to be in a place where you're supported as an artist, as a performer, a singer, a musician, a broadcaster, a person making videos. So that's a different conversation, but it's one that's interesting to me.
I think we need to mention, though, too, this pop-up video or pop-up opera that you did at the Palace. These were 9 scenes that we basically unloaded on people eating brunch. So every 15 minutes, there would be another opera scene for 5 or 10 minutes, and we'd take over the whole restaurant, essentially, and surprising people because they didn't know this was going to happen. And in the middle of their meal, these pop-up operas show up. And talk about, being uncomfortable and we're making and maybe not have an appreciation for opera because maybe none of them have ever experienced opera before. And then here it is, it pops up in front of them.
And if you watch those videos, there's pure joy in the people watching that. But I think that there's also been pushback. Can you two kind of talk about what that pushback is and why you think that pushback is happening? What their thesis is in the pushback?
I don't know. Put the question another way. I don't quite have an answer coming to me on that one. Pushback about popping up, or pushback about taking classical music. I mean, taking some things that are sacred in the repertoire and canoodling them. There's certainly pushback on that. Some people just don't like it all, the kinds of things that we do here. But
yeah, please articulate that more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've had people say, no, no, I can't do that kind of thing. That's too embarrassing. Um, um, some performers, but most performers are hungry. Most of the people at the regional level that where my artists come from, we're hungry to perform, and we work for very, no wages or very low pay. Um, so that's a challenge. Um, I did want to mention my other big video. This is interesting. Was one I released at the beginning of 2019. It was filmed at 2019 in Ethiopia, and it's called "Rejoice Abyssinia," where I took a piece of music, handle from the Messiah, "Rejoice Greatly" from the Messiah, and I rewrote the lyrics for that. It was English originally, so I wasn't changing. And then I worked with Circus Abyssinia to create a scene. And that's, I have 50,000 views from Ethiopia and 50,000 views in the US. So that's my other, the satisfaction, the acknowledgement from an audience that a piece is interesting is just, is that. And that was, again, dead white European man music. And working with Ethiopian circus performers to create something that says rejoice. And it was written to put the acrobats at the center of this. And it was, again, intended to empower young women. And it spoke about the changes that were being made in the country. For the first time, young women were seeing women appointed to leadership positions under the president who came in about 2 years ago. And so it was inviting young women to rejoice greatly because they could see a different future.
Mm-hmm.
Now.
But I would be remiss if we didn't affirm that, you use the word sacred, that, this so-called sacred nature of, that surrounds Western European classical music was something that was completely manufactured by way of, societal racism, of sexism, of classism. So I think when we liberate ourselves from that conditioning that says this music sits up on this mountain and it should not be touched, if we liberate ourselves and understand the conditioning that went into that, we can understand how we can elevate those pieces of music from the canon and actually make them matter. Because let's face it, we don't need opera to have conversations of societal issues, of racism, and how we can activate ourselves to change those things. We don't need opera for that. Opera can be a tool for that. And I think, you have to understand the conditioning that surrounds opera and Western classical music in general to understand why it is appropriate and maybe even necessary to update and change this music to make it relevant and make it speak a message, because it spoke a message initially. It spoke a message when it was written, and it can speak a message now too.
Yeah. But
I'm so interested that cultural gatekeeping around not wanting the soprano to be a feminine hero seems to me in relationship to an accessibility boundary for Black people of color in the arts, that there's a fundamentalist, it can only be done this way thing that I think that you've maybe faced in the past, Gail.
Oh yeah. I mean, yes. Certainly. Well, let's see, I come up against feeling the discomfort that I feel is, as somebody who is not trained, a conservatory trained person, putting myself up as somebody who can sing an aria. That's, that now, and I look at that, I think, Garrett, the two of you, I think I have not suffered from racism. There's some gender thing happening, but for female roles, not so much. But I'm up against the ways in which, well, it's certification. I mean, I haven't been certified to have the authority to do these kinds of things, and I run into people who've invested a lot in their career and their education and their role and their status as professionals. So I run into that, but I think that's a very small thing compared to the larger issues of racism and classism.
You know, there's just one thing I want to bring up from the other day, because in a way, I feel like it answers a question I had around this cultural gatekeeping. And when you talked about your Ethiopian piece, we had a discussion about what it means to be classic, what a classic art form is. I would love someone to talk about that. I found it so interesting.
Yeah, that was Garrett.
Sure. So, as I mentioned in my introduction, I do a lot of arts consultation. I talk to a lot of school groups. This COVID era has definitely, has helped make that more of a thing. When we're talking about virtual. But what I spend the bulk of my time doing is running my LLC and the companion podcast called TRILLOQUY. So what me and my team, shout out to my co-host Scott Blankenship, what we affirm in that project is that every culture has music, and every one of those musics has something that is foundationally classic about them. So what we do and what we're trying to inspire in other individuals and in arts institutions is taking the phrase classical music and including, we have that word inclusion, right? And including classic styles of music from other cultures, and not and decentering the white gaze and that Western European perspective on what is art music. So what are some specific examples? Eons before there was anyone named Strauss or even Bach, there was music being codified in the Indian subcontinent, across East Asia, the motherland, the African continent. And in each one of those cultures, you have music that is classic, that is foundational, that is classical. So when I talk about breaking down that phrase, I talk about understanding that we've been conditioned to apply that phrase to the foundational music, some of the foundational music, not even all, but some of the foundational music of Western Europe, when in actuality, it will benefit the genre and us all, the arts in general, to really spread that out and insert other classic aesthetics into the conversation. Again, going back to this piece of music from Deflator Mouse, once upon a time in certain spaces, a Hungarian Csardas would not have been considered anything classical, anything high art. I think that's a part of the conversation that's happening within the opera for that character to be there. That has changed over time. I think we're in a time now where we can expand that even further and consider so much more classical music. And in doing that, again, we have the opportunity to reach so much more people and make art spaces look as colorful as we allege to want them to be. But what does that cost? Again, as we were talking about earlier, a change in aesthetic. We have to be willing to maybe sit Mozart to the side for an Indian raga, or tell Mr. Strauss, we'll get to you next time. Here's an opera that uses hip hop aesthetics or black imagery or whatever you want to fill in there. So I think, I hope that answers what you were asking when we were talking about that cultural gatekeeping. We're talking about undoing the conditioning and the miseducation that surrounds art music and the arts in general.
So, interestingly, one of the benefits of not being a conservatory trained person and being completely unhinged from any of the conventions is I've had on 3 occasions a really wonderful experience of inviting musicians from a totally different genre to come in and overlay or work with Opera Frontier to work on a piece. So I have Arabian Magic Mozart, which is where we have an accompaniment with a tabla and sarod, and I have that was Bollywood Lakme was the sarod and the tabla, the kanun was an instrument, and it's a Middle Eastern instrument that was used as integrated into the Arabian Magic Mozart, which was based on the Mozart trio from Magic Flute. And then most recently in Ethiopia, worked with musicians there to, the Masenko was the instrument. So I've had the experience of seeing it was great, very interesting. And I'm always waiting for feedback. What do people think of this effort to put these 2 very different musical traditions together into a piece? And in each case, there had to be a musician who could really understood the Western tradition enough to figure out how to slip it in. It wasn't my knowledge and understanding, but I did create the context in which it happened. And at least in Ethiopia, I think people were thrilled with it. The Arabian Magic, Rejoice Abyssinia with this traditional, had a very accomplished Masenko player. Masenko is a one-stringed instrument, so it's like just amazing finger work and bowing to figure out how to merge these very different musical traditions. So,
plus the circus.
and oh yeah, then the circus on top of that. That was great. Yeah, yeah.
Y'all, I'm feeling so full and grateful for this conversation. I want to ask everyone a question. This can be as long or short as you want, just to kind of finish us off, unless there's any other thoughts. I'm kind of interested in what is next. What is next for the company? Who are you wanting to collaborate with? What type of music? What should we be thinking of? Whatever you want to say.
Well, I have 2 pieces on the boards that I'm thinking about, and I've contacted potential collaborators. I have a piece called Toscar. It's T.OSCA.R, and it is Tosca and Oscar, and it's a piece that will use Vici d'arte. I live for life. For art, I live for love. It will, and I'm looking for and have been speaking with a potential collaborator who will rap the same lyrics, and we will meet on a BART train, and we will and so there's a scene, there's a collaboration in the works there. And another piece that I have in mind is would be using Quando me vo, Musetta's waltz, her flirtatious waltz, sung by a street person, a woman on the street, saying, and the lyrics are, look at me. Whenever I go out, people look at me. So I am still mining this rep and thinking about how to, those are the ideas that I have in mind right now. And I'm trying to put them together so that they can happen once COVID, we have a little bit of a little bit let up here.
Yes, fingers crossed.
So what Garrett, what would you do with an opera company that's unhinged as this?
Sure. Yeah. Well, what I was thinking about as you're asking us to wrap up here is the fact that music is how our story has been told. Music is how our stories have been told. So when we're talking about giving space and shining a light on music, I think we have a responsibility to understand what story is being told and how we can, tell the story in a way that can benefit our lives today. Yes, I think Die Fledermaus is an incredible opera. As I said, I've performed it many times. I would love to have the opportunity again. What space are we feeling, and what opportunity do we have to tell the story in a way that can benefit us? I think the media that we watched earlier is a great example of that. And I think, as we continue to expand our creativity in this COVID world and what we hope to be a post COVID world, I think we have to, start to think about how can our art, how can we use our resources to spread awareness that will inspire action for greater change. I think, we're doing what we can on the digital platform, and there's some, really great movement happening. But if I can leave folks with anything, is that, again, music is how our story has been told, and we have to really take a big responsibility when we're talking about creating art and providing spaces for that art. The opera Die Fledermaus, as I mentioned last night, it's about champagne, and it ends, in that celebratory way. We all want to get to that celebration, but there's a lot of work that has to be put into it. And the arts can be a tool to that end. So we just need to always make sure that we're centering those sorts of things when we're moving forward, in my opinion, in our creation and in our advocacy within the arts.
For me, coming at it a little different angle, classes, my college classes are going to start in a little bit over a week, and going to take, like I always do, take the experiences I had in these last 6 weeks and bring them to that class and figure out just, I'm processing all this. And as I'm processing all this, I'm sharing it with my advanced students. And it's something that we're doing at Laney College. We're talking a lot about diversity and equity now. I am fortunate to work at a college that's very diverse. There's something like 110 languages spoken at that college. And so I think about, the struggle I had in Gail's piece is a similar struggle I have teaching at this very diverse college. And so I'm the experience of working with Gail and the experience of this conversation, I think, is going to process through me, and some message will get to my students.
I love that. I want to say that I am taking away such inspiration for action, risk, all of the lessons that we learned tonight. But I think my next step is to go watch a bunch of Opera Frontier videos that I missed and listen to some Trilloquy.
Yeah.
I am feeling very blessed. I hope everyone at home felt the energy that was in this room tonight. And thank you so much, y'all.
And thank you so much, both of you, all three of you, for honoring this. And a thank you to all the people who are listening.
Yes, yes, thank you everyone at home.
And all the mentors and people who work on social justice.
Yes. We thank you for being here. Go in peace, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good night.